Hey everybody, how's it going? So I've had a question crop up on the show quite a bit from time to time. A bunch of you guys have asked me the same thing, and I thought it's about time to do a dedicated episode just explaining this with some examples so even the guys who have a hard time understanding can figure it out. Now, today's topic is brought to you by the viewer KHero123.
Samples are different people playing drums. Oh, please define what an IR is and how it is different than samples.
Okay, you want it spelled out for you? Sure, here we go. Here's a track I did a few weeks back. Jackson Ward and John Suki playing on it. Jackson's on drums, John's on guitar. It's a great track. It's almost like an anime theme song. It'd be really cool if we can get it animated. Okay, here's the original track with a mix. We're using Slate plugins, and this is all Jackson on the drums. That's 100% real drums, no fuckery going on whatsoever. Now watch what happens when we change out the kick and snare. Notice a fucking difference! Now that's at its most basic rudimentary explanation, okay? When we sample replace the drums, we get something very, very different. Here's what happens when we change out the cabinet impulse. Now, we're not changing the guitar amp, we're not changing the performance, we're not changing anything. The only thing we're changing is the overall signature of the guitar sound, the EQ frequency response. Check this out. So that's using some angle cabs from an upcoming IR pack that is going to be coming out sooner or later. Now, here's what happens if we take that exact same riff and play it through some Marshalls. And here's the exact same riff played through 4 completely different cabinets. Notice the performance hasn't changed at all. It's the same impact. It's the same overall feel. We're not changing the player there at all. If you want to take another listen here, solo it up. And we go to the Marshall. And then to the angles. Oh, same performance. Just the overall brightness or darkness of the sound has changed. That's it. If you want to get into the nitty gritty here, we look at what's going on with the palm mutes. You can see they're slightly out of time and then they kind of sync up with each other. I'm leaving that in place because that's John's playing. I don't want to fuck with that. I want to leave that in because a rock and roll with a little bit of chaos in sounds a lot better than the sanitized bullshit we've been getting more often than not as of late. If you change to a different IR, you still have the same slightly misaligned time. Another set of IRs, the exact same thing. We're not changing the performance. Now, my biggest gripe with technology is when it's being abused, when we start editing the player out in search of perfection, because usually when you make a mix sound perfect, it sounds fucking boring! It's just not exciting anymore. Rock and roll needs a little bit of that chaos. It needs a little bit of that coloring outside of the lines kind of sound. It's not classical, guys. It's fucking rock and roll. It's supposed to be loose with the rules. Now, going back to the drums, once again, just to refresh your memory. So here's completely natural drums. And here's a complete sample replacement on the kick and snare. Now, we have all heard that kick before because that's Slate Kick 5. It sounds good, but it's used on everything. If you put that on your record, you're going to sound exactly the same as a million other records out there that use that exact same kick drum. Music went from being something unique and bands having their own sounds to just basically cookie cutter metal bands. You go to a McDonald's anywhere in the country, you get a Big Mac, it's going to be the same thing. You go see any metal band, pick up their CD, it's all going to have Slate Kick 5 on. What fucking fun is that? Where's the excitement in that? Now, I'm not saying you can't do basic augmentation. I mean, like, I have to concede here to Paul Lonnie made one of my favorite drum mixes ever. He had thrown a little bit of enhancement underneath the drums in terms of low frequency generation on the kick and a little bit of noise added to the snare. And if we do that here, we're not losing the sound of the drummer. We're still bringing that through. We're just kind of beefing it up a little bit. Okay, so real quickly, what we've got going on here is we've got a little bit of low frequency tone generator going on. And that's being triggered by the kick over here. I did a video on this a while back, and basically I'm just putting a send out from the kick track to this low frequency generator, and then I've got a gate going on as well that opens and closes with the kick drum. Mute that out. Still get a little bit of that sub, but we bring this in, just kind of fills it out that much more. That works absolutely fine. We're still hearing the initial impact of the kick. That's still Jackson playing. And it's still going to sound unique because that's just a low frequency thing. That's not necessarily, the same sample that every other band in the universe is using. This is the thing. I don't see drum samples as sounding bad necessarily. I don't find a problem with the Slate product. It's very good. It sounds very good. The problem is it sounds so good, nobody ever wants to do anything of their own anymore. That's the problem I have. That's the big issue I have. There's nothing unique about drum performances anymore because everybody sounds the fucking same. We also use the same fucking sample replacement, and then we all fucking time align everything and take the drummer completely out of the equation. And I think it really sucks for the modern drummer. That's why good drummers are becoming so difficult to find these days. It's because nobody fucking wants to bother because they know they're just going to get replaced. Now, we go on to the snare drum. This is a little bit kind of the same idea. I've got a snare noise track here. If we listen, we take the gate off. A little bit of pink noise, a little bit of reverb. Now, same idea is going on over here. I got my snare drum over here. That's just the top mic, bottom mic. Add a bit of overheads. And a room. And that's a pretty gnarly little snare sound. I really like that. That's got Jackson's impact. That's got his playing in there. I'm going to show you guys. There's a little subtle shift going on with the snare as well that I've never actually seen a drum sample program be able to mimic. Not yet anyway, not with today's technology. Will it happen in the future? I have no doubt. Like amp sims 20 years ago sucked a complete hairy balls, but these days they're actually getting to be pretty good. I hope we're going to see some improvements in drum sample replacement and make them even more human now than they already are. Hopefully we're going to get to hear more drum sample sets as well, and people are going to start exploring new sounds instead of just trying to copy each other because, well, let's face it, that shit's kind of fucking boring. Anyway, so what I got going on here is I have a send from my snare track. It's going to the snare noise track, and we've got a pink noise generator, which is right here. It's just making some noise, and the gate is being triggered by the snare. So it's going to give a little blast of that noise. Just adding a little bit. Now, because we've got this gated, we can change the overall attack and how this is going to sound. We can add sustain. We can add to the initial attack. There's a bunch of different ways we can do this. So let's turn off the overheads and the room for a second here. We're just going to go on this, and I'll show you guys what's happening. I was messing around with this last night. This is kind of neat. Change the attack and the release. Now we're just adding noise to the attack, which is kind of cool, and we can totally play with that. If we lengthen the release, we get a longer tail on the drum. It's cool. But I'm going to dial that in, and then we move the attack back. We can do some funky stuff there too. take the snare off. That might be just a little bit too weird. So I like a slightly slower attack, kind of let that transient of the drum through the initial attack, and then we add a little bit of sustain onto the drum as well. And it kind of, and we just bring in how much we want. Now, I was experimenting with white noise, and it's a little harsh in my opinion. I like the pink noise a little bit better. Adds a nice little effect to the snare sound. Now, I normally don't put this stuff on my drum mixes ever, but I thought it'd be cool after my discussion with Paul Lonnie and how he used that kind of thing on the Megadeth Peace Sells record, which I absolutely adore. I think it does work in this respect, especially. Now, if you go for a full-on sample replacement, though, you're going to get something extremely different. Now, if we take a listen to the snare drum, especially the snare, this is where it starts to get a little bit stale because it's the same sound over and over and over again. You don't get that subtle interplay of the drummer where he's varying his hit strength, where he's hitting it on the drum. You know, a little bit off center adds a little bit more ring into the sound. And then it depends on how much rim on the rim shot gets involved. All of that stuff matters, and it's going to have a slight subtle shift in the sound. When you put a sample on, you don't get that. Now, what I really don't like is the fact that the ring on that snare is exactly the same every single time. And there's no variance in the playing. One thing I've noticed after recording drummers year after year after year after year is that their hit strength on the snare varies on what part they're playing. In this song, you've got like a verse and a chorus, and there's crossover, you know, the hats and the snare, and then he goes over to the ride. And usually when a drummer goes over to the ride, they're hitting the snare just a little bit harder or a lot harder, depending on how experienced the drummer is. Jackson's amazing where he's able to be super consistent with his hits. You don't notice a big shift between the hat and the ride snare. But other drummers, you'll definitely hear that. I've had drummers, you know, where they actually played with two different hands. I had one drummer who was left-handed, but he played ambidextrous. On the hats, he'd play his hat on the left hand and the snare on the right. And then when he go to the ride, he'd do the exact opposite. Snare with the left, ride on the right. And it drove me crazy because the snare would be so much louder when he'd play this way as opposed to playing this way because he couldn't hit the snare as hard with his right hand. Drove me absolutely up the fucking wall, but it contributed to the uniqueness of the sound of that band. And with samples, you're not going to get that. That's the big difference in my opinion. And even here, we don't hear a huge change when he goes from the hat to the ride, but it is there and it's very subtle. It's pretty subtle shift, but you can hear it just being hit a little bit harder. There's a little bit more of an impact on the drum, and I really like that sound. Unfortunately, when you do sample replacement, this doesn't happen because the technology isn't there yet. I think we got one different snare hit there out of that entire thing. If like we solo that up, take a listen. Yeah. Sure sounds like a real drummer to me. Again, we take a listen to the non-sample play snare. Even that weak hit right in here. I don't know what the hell Trigger's doing to that, but this sounds like rock and roll. We go into this weak hit right here. And it's like, that doesn't sound real. What the fuck is that? Drummers don't sound like that. Especially they don't have the exact same ring on every single hit. So that's part of it right there. Like I said, you go do a low-level replacement where you're maybe adding just a little bit of noise into the signal. You're not changing the impact of the drum. You're not changing the way of the drums being hit. In this case, we're adding a little bit more sustain, but Jackson is still there. He's not being overwritten. That works for me a lot better than straight up sample replacement. Of course, it can be said, oh, you can do blends, and that's absolutely true. I had a conversation with Christian Cola the other day about the whole drum sample thing, and he had a good point. It's like the trick about doing sample replacement or even augmentation is trying to make it sound like it's a real drum and not make it sound fake and phony. And I think what happens is when we take the dynamics out of the sample replacement and just pin everything at maximum, that's where things get really fucking boring. Because drummers just simply don't play like that. To me, listening to a drummer is almost like being programmed to recognize what a human face does, because a human face, everybody can pick up on different emotional expressions, and with the drums, it's the same kind of thing. We can pick up on those slight imperfections, and that's what gives drums its humanity. And when you start replacing the drums with samples that are perfect every time, I think we really lose something. We lose some of the art that goes into making music, and it becomes something else, and it becomes bland, boring, and stale. Now, I'm not saying I'm 100% against sample replacement. A little bit of augmentation apparently goes a very long way, as I've learned. The trick is knowing how much is too much. And if you're 100% replacing the drummer, that's definitely way too much. Try a little subtlety. Try letting the elements of the drummer through. And for fuck's sakes, leave the timing alone as much as you possibly can. Because the minute you start time aligning everything, that's when you take the drummer just completely out of the equation.